The German pilot squeezed the trigger, and the sky lit up with fire. Hundreds of 20mm shells tore toward the American bomber in front of him. Any normal aircraft would have exploded instantly, but not this one. Through the smoke, the giant silhouette refused to fall. Its wings were shredded, its tail was split open, and its engines burned like dying stars, yet the B-17 flying fortress kept climbing, inch by inch, as if daring its attackers to try again. The German pilot circled in disbelief. "How is it still flying?" he whispered into the radio. His comrades attacked from every angle, pouring everything they had into the metal beast. But the bomber swallowed their bullets, like it was built from something beyond steel. And then, against all odds, it turned its guns toward them. This wasn't just an aircraft. It was a message. You cannot break me. Long before the Allies claimed the skies over Europe, one machine rose to define the brutal air war that unfolded above the clouds. The American B-17, nicknamed the Flying Fortress, was more than a bomber. It was a symbol of defiance, a steel giant designed to survive the impossible and deliver its payload deep into the heart of Nazi Germany. But for the German Luftwaffe, this aircraft became something far more unsettling. Again and again, fighter pilots reported the same unbelievable sight: B-17s returning home with wings torn open, engines missing, fuselages ripped apart, yet somehow still flying. These bombers didn't simply endure enemy fire, they absorbed it, held together by rugged engineering, fearless crews, and a will that seemed almost supernatural. This episode will take you inside those moments of raw terror and disbelief, when seasoned German pilots watched their shells vanish into the bomber's armored skin, only to face its guns moments later. We'll uncover the engineering secrets behind its resilience, the missions that became legends, and the psychological shock that spread across Luftwaffe squadrons. Because the Flying Fortress didn't just survive the war. It redefined it. For the German Luftwaffe, early encounters with American bombers seemed like nothing more than routine hunts. Their Bf-109s and Fw-190s were fast, agile, and armed with 20mm and 30mm cannons capable of shredding most aircraft with a single well-placed burst. They had cut down British bombers, Soviet formations, and nearly anything that attempted to cross the skies of occupied Europe. To many German pilots, the arrival of American heavy bombers felt like just another challenge. But that confidence didn't last. The first time German fighters intercepted a full formation of B-17s, something felt wrong. Even from a distance, the bombers looked unnervingly organized, flying tight box formations that turned the sky into a moving fortress wall. There were no weak angles, no exposed flanks. Every approach meant flying into a trap of interlocking .50 caliber machine guns. Still, German pilots pressed in, believing their firepower would break the formation apart. They came in from above, from the tail, from the nose, classic tactics designed to tear open a bomber. But the result was unlike anything they expected. Their cannon shells struck metal, and the bombers barely flinched. The bullets sparked and ricocheted, ripping holes but failing to cripple the massive aircraft. Pilots radioed in confusion as they saw B-17s continue straight and level even after taking direct hits that would have destroyed most bombers instantly. Many Luftwaffe aces described the same sinking feeling: it should be falling, why isn't it falling? As they pulled in closer for kill shots, the bombers answered with a storm of gunfire. 12 to 13 heavy machine guns, each capable of tearing a fighter apart in seconds, filled the air with burning tracers. German pilots suddenly realized that every attack meant gambling their lives against coordinated kill zones designed to bleed attackers dry. Reports soon reached command. These American bombers are different. They take too much punishment. They don't die. Slowly, a chilling understanding spread through Luftwaffe squadrons. They weren't fighting just another bomber. They were facing a machine built to challenge their very doctrine, an aircraft engineered not merely to fly, but to endure everything they threw at it. To understand why the B-17 struck fear into German pilots, you have to understand what it truly was: a moving fortress carved from aluminum and American engineering ambition. The B-17 wasn't designed to be elegant or fast. It was built to survive. Every inch of the aircraft reflected a philosophy that the crew's best chance of coming home was not in outrunning danger, but in outlasting it. Start with its frame. The B-17's body was dense with structural supports, ribs, and spars that created a rigid skeleton capable of absorbing incredible punishment. Even when large sections of the wings or fuselage were blown away, the aircraft maintained enough integrity to stay airborne. Engineers designed it so that damage in one area wouldn't doom the entire machine, a philosophy completely different from many aircraft of the era. But what made the aircraft truly formidable was its redundancy. Multiple hydraulic systems. Multiple control lines. For powerful engines spaced wide apart, each able to compensate if another failed, or was shot clean off. Where most bombers relied heavily on a single component to stay alive, the B-17 operated like a creature with backup organs, each one ready to take over when another was destroyed. Then there were the guns, an arsenal packed into the bomber like it was preparing for war on every side at once. A typical B-17 carried between 12 and 13 Browning .50 caliber machine guns, placed strategically to cover every angle, the nose, the tail, the sides, the belly, the top. This meant any attacking German fighter had only seconds before crossing into another gunner's line of fire. And these gunners were not passive passengers. They were trained marksmen, often teenagers, sitting behind weapons that hurled heavy rounds powerful enough to tear through steel and engines. For a fighter pilot diving toward the formation, the bomber didn't look like prey, it looked like a bristling porcupine ready to strike back. Inside the aircraft, the crew performed a delicate balancing act between duty and survival. The pilot fought to keep the wounded machine steady. The navigator traced routes through flak-filled skies. The bombardier prepared the payload while shrapnel screamed past the nose. And the gunners, wide-eyed, freezing, breathing oxygen through masks, fired at anything that threatened their fragile world at 25,000 feet. All of it together, the armor, the engineering, the guns, the crew, created something extraordinary. A bomber that didn't just fly into enemy territory. It carved its way in, and refused to fall. The morning of August 17, 1943, began like any other mission for the 8th Air Force. Hundreds of B-17s lifted off from English airfields, their engines shaking the ground as they formed their massive box formations. Their target, the ball-bearing factories at Schweinfurt and Regensburg, critical to the German war machine. What they didn't know was that this mission would become the moment when German pilots truly realized what they were up against. As the bombers crossed into enemy airspace, the Luftwaffe scrambled everything it had. Dozens of Bf-109s and Fw-190s rose from the clouds, forming a deadly wall of fighters waiting to crash into the American formation. Among them was Oberleutnant Hans Meyer, a skilled pilot with years of combat experience. To him, this was supposed to be another routine interception. Another easy kill. But nothing about this formation was routine. From miles away, Meyer watched as the B-17s flew in perfect harmony, their tight boxes weaving an impenetrable net of machine gun fire. The Luftwaffe had trained to break apart bomber formations, but this formation refused to break. Meyer dove first, sending a burst of cannon fire ripping into the lead bomber. He expected to see flames erupt instantly. Instead, he saw only sparks. The B-17 shuddered, dipped, then returned to its position like a wounded animal refusing to fall. Another German fighter approached from the tail, firing into the bomber's most vulnerable point. The tail gunner fired back, tracers slicing the sky. The German pilot broke off in shock, his engine smoking, his canopy cracked. He had barely escaped the kill zone. Meyer regrouped and went in again, this time targeting a bomber whose left wing was already torn open. "This one must go down," he muttered. He fired another barrage, tearing holes through the fuselage. To his disbelief, the bomber held its course. Inside that very aircraft, chaos erupted. Oxygen masks dangled as flames licked the interior. The portside engine coughed black smoke. The radio operator tightened a tourniquet around the wounded waist gunner while still firing at incoming fighters. The pilot fought the controls with trembling hands, holding the aircraft steady despite every instinct telling him to dive. Yet the B-17 pressed forward. The German pilots, growing desperate, launched a final coordinated attack, 20 fighters diving simultaneously from different angles. A storm of cannon bursts pounded the formation. One B-17 exploded in a ball of fire. Another spiraled downward, trailing smoke. But the third, Meyer's target, refused to fall. It was missing half its tail. Its nose was shattered. 2 engines were dead. And still, it flew. By the time Meyer pulled away, out of ammunition and out of answers, he radioed in disbelief. These bombers are not aircraft. They are monsters. That day, the Luftwaffe learned a brutal truth. Breaking a B-17 was never simple. Surviving one was. To the Germans watching from their cockpits, it seemed impossible. How could a bomber with its wings shredded and its engines burning still remain airborne? The answer wasn't luck. It was the meticulous, almost obsessive engineering that went into every inch of the B-17's design, a design built on one philosophy: if one system fails, another must keep the plane alive. The first secret lay in its skeleton. Unlike many bombers built with lightweight structures, the B-17 used a box-like frame constructed from heavy, interlocking beams and spars. This internal framework acted like the ribs of a steel animal. If one section was destroyed, the remaining structure redistributed the stress and kept the aircraft intact. Even when entire panels were blown away, the frame clung together, refusing to let the bomber break apart. Then came the fuel system. German pilots expected their rounds to ignite fuel and turn the B-17 into a fireball. Instead, many of their shells passed through harmlessly. This was thanks to self-sealing fuel tanks, rubber-lined compartments that swelled and tightened when punctured, choking off leaks before they could ignite. A system ahead of its time, and a nightmare for attackers. But the engines were the true miracle. The B-17 could fly on 3 engines. It could fly on 2. In desperate moments, it could limp home on just one, its massive propeller clawing at the air like a lifeline. Each engine was placed far apart to prevent a single hit from destroying the entire row. Even catastrophic failures didn't doom the aircraft, the crew simply shut down the damaged engine and carried on. Control systems added another layer of resilience. Redundant cables ran through different parts of the plane, ensuring that even if one section was severed by enemy fire, another could still move the rudder, elevators, or ailerons. Pilots often described flying with half their controls gone, yet still maintaining enough authority to steer home. And finally, there were the guns. Every approach toward the bomber meant entering overlapping arcs of .50 caliber fire. If one gun jammed or one gunner was wounded, 6 more positions were ready to defend the aircraft. It was a fortress in every sense. To German pilots, these secrets were invisible. All they saw was a bomber that swallowed their bullets, and refused to die. As the war intensified, German pilots began to speak openly about a new and unsettling truth. Attacking a B-17 was no longer just a tactical challenge, it was a psychological battle they felt themselves losing. For years, Luftwaffe aces dominated the skies, confident in their speed, skill, and firepower. But the arrival of the Flying Fortress reshaped that confidence into something unfamiliar, something dangerously close to fear. It began with whispers in briefing rooms. Pilots returning from missions described B-17s that absorbed impossible damage yet stayed in formation, still firing with shocking precision. Some spoke of bombers flying with their tails nearly severed, or with holes large enough to see daylight through the fuselage. Others recounted how entire engines had been ripped away without slowing the aircraft's advance. What unnerved them most was not the aircraft's durability, but the unshakable determination of the crews inside it. Gunners who kept firing even when the plane was burning. Pilots who held their course through hurricane winds of flak. Navigator and bombardier teams who continued their duties while bullets shredded the metal inches around them. For German fighter pilots, each attack run became a high-stakes gamble. Approaching too close meant diving into a realm of heavy machine gun fire that could kill them instantly. But staying too far meant their cannon rounds lacked the force to pierce the bomber's armored frame. Either choice carried risk. Many Luftwaffe veterans later admitted they preferred engaging agile Allied fighters rather than confronting a formation of B-17s. Fighters might outmaneuver them, but the bombers fought back with a kind of mechanical rage. In pilot diaries, one phrase appeared again and again. "The flying fortress does not fear us." And in that realization, something vital shifted. For the first time, German airmen felt that they were not the hunters. They were the ones being tested. Among all the stories that spread across airfields, none shook the German pilots more than the legendary missions where B-17 survived destruction that defied reason. These were not just tales, they were eyewitness accounts, shared by Luftwaffe pilots who could scarcely believe what they had seen. One such story came from a mission over Bremen in 1943. A B-17 known as All-American was struck during a fierce interception. A Messerschmitt 109 slammed into its tail, shearing away nearly the entire vertical stabilizer and ripping a gaping wound through the fuselage. German pilots watched the bomber spin, fall, and then, miraculously, stabilize. The crew inside used every ounce of skill and strength to keep the aircraft level. With no tail, no balance, and half the plane open to the sky, All-American flew hundreds of miles back to base. Its survival became a symbol of everything the Germans feared about the flying fortress. Another story unfolded above the frozen skies of Europe, where the B-17, ye old pub, was torn apart by fighters and flak. Its nose was shattered, its engines were hit, and half the crew lay wounded. The bomber was so crippled that German ace Franz Stigler approached to deliver the final blow. But when he saw the torn, bleeding aircraft limping through the air, its guns silent, its crew barely alive, he did something unthinkable: he refused to finish it. Instead, Stigler escorted the broken bomber out of German territory, saluting the crew before turning away. The B-17 made it home, and its story became one of the most extraordinary acts of honor in the war. Then there were the countless unnamed fortresses that came back with holes large enough for men to stand inside. Bombers missing engines, wings shredded by cannon fire, landing gear gone, controls severed, yet somehow managing to glide onto English runways, skidding to a halt with crews emerging in disbelief that they were still alive. To German pilots, these missions were haunting. By 1944, the presence of the B-17 had reshaped the very nature of the air war over Europe. What began as a single bomber design had evolved into a strategic force that the Germans could no longer ignore. Every mission pushed deeper into the heart of Nazi industry, striking factories, railways, oil plants, and communication hubs, targets the German war machine depended on for survival. At first, the Luftwaffe tried to overwhelm the bombers with sheer numbers. Then they experimented with new tactics, head-on attacks, rocket-armed fighters, even special armor-piercing ammunition. But none of it changed the outcome. For every B-17 that fell, more arrived the next day, flown by crews who knew exactly what they were flying into. The bombers came in waves, and with them came American long-range escorts like the P-51 Mustang, whose arrival sealed the fate of Germany's air superiority. The B-17's resilience meant that missions pressed deeper and deeper into enemy territory, crippling vital production centers. German cities felt the thunder of their engines. Commanders felt the tightening noose of dwindling resources. Pilots felt the weight of fighting a machine that simply refused to die. In time, the combined force of the Flying Fortress and Allied fighters shattered the Luftwaffe's strength. The skies, once dominated by swift German interceptors, now belonged firmly to the Allies. And with air superiority came a turning point in the war, one that made the final defeat of Nazi Germany possible. The B-17 didn't just participate in the air campaign. It transformed it. When the war finally ended, the wreckage of Europe lay silent beneath the clouds where so many battles had been fought. But the legend of the B-17 flying fortress lived on, not just in the memories of the men who flew them, but in the minds of the pilots who tried to bring them down. For American crews, the B-17 was more than metal. It was a lifeboat in the sky, a shield that carried them through storms of fire and brought them home when logic said they should never have survived. It became a symbol of endurance, courage, and the unbreakable will of ordinary men placed in extraordinary danger. For German pilots, it was a lesson written in tracer fire and disbelief. They had faced aircraft before. They had defeated bombers before. But the flying fortress was something different, something that challenged their expectations, their tactics, and their confidence. Even today, photographs of shattered B-17s landing safely on English runways seem almost unreal. They stand as reminders that engineering, bravery, and determination can combine to create something larger than war itself. In the end, the B-17 didn't just survive history. It carved its name into it. One bullet at a time.